Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Hugh Huff. For those who don't know me, I'm one of the partners at Rethink Travel Marketing. It is a real honor for me to be moderating this session, COVID-19, Tourism, Livelihoods, and Conservation, a Systemic Correction Opportunity with my friend, Jim Sano. Jim's presentation will run about 30 minutes. It will be followed by Q&A, which I will be monitoring. So if you have any questions for Jim, please put them in the Q&A chat box. I first had the pleasure of meeting Jim at the Adventure Travel World Summit in Salta a few years ago, where over some delicious Argentine parrillada in Malbec was telling me his thoughts on how we need to get more tour operators to developing destinations. This way, tourism could play a key part in not only the livelihoods of the communities in these destinations, but also helping conserve their cultures as well as their natural environments or their homes. Before joining WWF, Jim had an illustrious career in both the public and private sector, working as a park ranger and special assistant to the superintendent at the Yosemite National Park in California, to president of the Geographic Expeditions, a San Francisco-based adventure travel company that offers educational travel, location management, and sustainable travel consulting services. Today, of course, Jim works at the World Wildlife Fund, the world's most famous and iconic NGO, as the Vice President of Travel, Tourism, and Conservation. It's an incredible title, man. Currently, Jim serves as a senior advisor on sustainable tourism programs and develops new initiatives to engage our most committed supporters. Jim has an incredible presentation for us. So without further ado, Jim, on to you.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and it is delighted to be here. And I was just telling Hugh, I just got back from my first trip after nearly a year and a half, and what a delight it is to actually experience the world again, the natural world especially, and also meet some of the people. I was in Kauai who were dramatically impacted by the loss of tourism. And so, as you all know all too well, COVID really was a gut punch for the industry. And it really caused a huge drop in the number of travelers. But what it also did is it really put the attention on the world, really for the first time in a long time, about how large the travel industry is. And as you can see here, unbeknownst to a lot of people, it's the third largest industry in the world, larger than automotives and the financial sector and chemicals even. Employs 1 in 10 employees in the world. In 48 developing countries, tourism is the first or second export earner. In 60 countries within the top 5. And then especially in small island nations in sub-Saharan Africa, overwhelmingly nature-based tourism is hugely significant. What is not also fully known is that in 2019, there were 8 billion visits to the 4,000 national parks and 202,000 terrestrial and marine protected areas. And these travelers spend a huge amount of money, $600 billion, in and around protected areas. And so these funds really are the fuel, and they're the largest market-based contributor to finance protected areas. But also in a landmark study by one of our senior scientists, Robin Naidu, he looked at 600 protected areas in 34 less developed countries, and also how tourism and protected areas intersect in terms of generating income for the local economy that supports the infrastructure, healthcare facilities, and then also ultimately the livelihoods of the individuals who live in those destinations. And in this particular study, he looked at 87,000 children, and what he found in their families and communities, 17% higher wealth levels, 16% lower likelihood of poverty, and 10% of the children had higher height to weight scores compared to those communities that were not in and around protected areas. And so, as I totally experienced last week, also many people don't realize there's a vast supply chain that is connected to the travel industry. And you'll see that your part in terms of putting together trips is that orange part, the traveler's journey. But in the dark green is all the tourism service providers that feed into trips. And then the light green are those companies that are servicing it over all the industry, like credit card companies and so forth. And so when the pandemic hit, it was estimated by the World Travel and Tourism Council that there were 1.1 billion fewer international travelers, 1.2 trillion in lost export earnings, and roughly between 120 and 194 million jobs lost or furloughed. And in one of the countries that we work in, Namibia, which is one of the conservation travel success stories, you can see here the impact on an industry where the population is not all that large, is about 2 million people, directly affecting some of the programs that WWF works on that are both related to communities and wildlife protection. And so the question before us, as there are greater levels of vaccination and rather stunningly and magically, is the industry going to want to return to normal as fast as possible? Understandably, that is a desire on the part of those businesses that were so devastated. And so, as we could see, the travel industry has grown. This is international travelers, the United Nations World Tourism Organization chart. And when I had my first trip, international trip, it was about 200 million travelers. And then just before COVID hit, there was roughly 1.4 million travelers. And so as you could see here, the general trend lines, this is the 2008 economic downturn. And many of you who have been in the business also know that between 2000 and 2004, there was the dot-com bust, there was 9/11, there was Gulf War II, and then there was SARS. And so, that was right around here. So I think you're all experiencing that there's a huge amount of pent-up demand. And although there was a downturn in the aviation industry, just in 2016, there were roughly 23,000 aircraft, and that is projected to grow to about 45,000 aircraft in 2036. I don't know if it'll go up that fast, but that was the general trend lines. And of course, we were all on the headlines over tourism was an issue, too many people visiting parks. And this was also an issue when I had my career in the National Park Service. When I was working part of the Yosemite General Management or Master Planning process. And at that time, there were 2.5 million park visitors. In 2018, there were 5 million park visitors. And so this gets at the root of the problem with the National Park Service and many destinations is how do you protect the natural and cultural resources for future generations while providing a high quality visitor experience and benefiting local communities. And so really COVID, with such a huge impact on the industry, has created what I call a market correction opportunity to influence how the industry recovers, create sustainable, resilient solutions, and link some of the recovery capital to sustainability. And there's a greater desire among the financial communities and also travelers in a recent Booking.com survey that there is an elevated desire to return in a more sustainable way, which fits very nicely into WWF's mission, which is to stop the degradation of our planet's natural environment and create a future where people live in harmony with nature. And so there are blueprints that are emerging. One I think very highly of is the UNWTO's One Planet vision for responsible recovery of the travel sector. And it's based on on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've created a wedding cake of these goals, the 17 goals, where the biosphere, protection of natural resources is at the bottom. And that provides, if you take care of that, a vibrant and healthy society, and ultimately a better economy. And number 17 at the top is it all takes partnerships to do so. Because after all, if you do not take care of the biosphere, ultimately, and cultural resources as well, that's your travel asset. I mean, if those places are degraded and people don't want to go there, get all over TripAdvisor or whatever, that's really a horrible experience. Public health, of course, is another one of the pillars, obviously, that the industry is wrestling right now. And also that there's increasing evidence, not only with COVID, but also with Ebola and other diseases, that the coronavirus is not only a public health crisis, but an ecological one, zoonotic diseases. And so this is the area by another one of the pillars, the second pillar, biodiversity conservation. Again, protecting natural barriers to zoonotic disease like deforestation, invest in nature-based solutions, and capture value of conservation through tourism. And so going back to Namibia, I thought I'd show you a video of how it works.
As a young boy, nature was something that inspired me. I was just living with my father, and he used to take me out in the field. He was a farmer. He was also a poacher. And then the headman appointed him as one of the first community game guard. This is the guy that has been elected to look after wildlife.
One of the men who became a game guard told me the story that when he used to walk from one village to another, along the way he would see wildlife. He said it wasn't a long way to walk. But now that the wildlife is gone and he sees nothing along the way, it's a long way. During the 70s, commercial poaching started throughout Africa. By the early 80s, there was very little wildlife left in Namibia. With the colonial era, wildlife is state property. So local people feel it's not of concern to them what happens to it. With independence, all that changed.
Driven by the change in the mindset of community members, we've seen wildlife numbers start to rise all across the communal areas. If they're incentivized to manage those resources, then they're incentivized also to protect them. Tourism is fundamental to that process.
What brings tourists to Namibia is our ecosystem and our biodiversity.
The incentives are a key part of it, but the sense of ownership is really critical part. We know in the past 18 months we've had poaching incidents in our communal conservancies. The poacher was apprehended within 24 hours. That's a direct result of the community recognizing that these poachers are stealing from them. People talk about their wildlife with pride, and they're true stewards of the wildlife.
Conservation is working in Namibia. It's happening here, right here. I'm so passionate about conservation that is part of me. It lives with me. I think we are trying something that is unique, and we are free to share it with the rest of the world. This is how we do it in Namibia.
So again, that's an example of what we aspire to do around the world. And the next pillar is climate, of course, and reconciling the growth of tourism with the contribution of greenhouse gases from aircraft. And these are some of the initiatives that are going to be focused on by not only the UN, but also the World Economic Forum in terms of minimizing the impact of aviation on our planets. And really the ecosystems are being threatened. Coral reefs are one of them, and the tourism revenue that is directly connected to coral reef tourism. The next pillar is circular economy, the elimination of plastics, recycling, and waste management, such as food waste. And so WWF has been working on developing toolkits for hotels, the hotel industry, in terms of avoiding single-use plastics and packaging at hotels. It has also partnered with American Hotels and Lodging Association on toolkits for fighting food waste. And this not only entail for all different types of positions within a hotel. And we have, in partnership with Lobster Inc., developed a training for a 5-part training course, not only in English, but also in Chinese as well. And this short video gives you a sense of what is involved with this course. So this is an interesting project because when it was started with funding from the Rockefeller Foundation pre-COVID, and we road tested this toolkit with all the major hotel chains, Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, Kimpton, also the Mandarin Oriental property and properties in Asia. And it resulted in, over a 12-week pilot, a 10 to 38% decrease in food waste, which was rather stunning in that short amount of time. And it really illustrates the potential for not only the big chains, but also throughout the hotel industry when you think about all the events and catering and so forth. And many people don't realize that addressing food waste is one of the top greenhouse gas solutions. Social inclusion is another big part in terms of the recovery, and making sure that the relief and the recovery funding is targeted to vulnerable groups, and long-term support for small and medium enterprises, not just the large companies. And then again, repurposing tourism as a supporter for communities and community livelihoods. And then the last one is governance and finance, working together. And this is UN SDGs number 7, that in order for all of this to work, all of the stakeholders need to come together. And this is not an easy thing throughout the world, and we know that all too well in this country. But it can happen, certainly in places like Bhutan, which is kind of idyllic. But the process by which destinations are managed is really beginning to emerge, where there is a multiple track process where stakeholder involvement and showing the economic social benefits to arrive at a plan, a master plan, if you will, for destinations. And those plans are based on good science, where one can determine the baseline of what exists, what kind of resources exist to protect, and that are real, again, the real tourism assets. And in a place like Yosemite, really address some of the over-tourism issues, as I mentioned before. And that is beginning to happen, not only in terms of over the years since I left, wilderness permits, number of campsites, number of people who are allowed to stay in lodging. And then the big one was addressing day use reservations, or day use visitors. And so when COVID hit, they instituted a day use reservation system where they only allowed a certain number of travelers to go in for the day. And that made a huge difference in terms of not only the impact on the environment, but also the quality of the experience. And this has also been implemented already in other places like nearby where I live, near Woods National Monument, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, where the coastal redwoods are protected. We're also working with corporate partners, large and small. And in some cases, what you might think are unlikely corporate partners, like with the cruise lines. And so this was, we just finished a 5-year partnership, and we're about to embark on another 5-year partnership, but this illustrates some of the initiatives that we're working on, such as sustainable seafood sourcing. Royal Caribbean committed to sourcing 90% of their wild-caught seafood from certified sources, 75% from of their farm-raised seafood from aquaculture certified sources, emissions reductions of 35% from the 2005 levels. On the shore excursion side, which is very interesting, this part I was working on, and that is to offer 1,000 shore excursions operated by Global Sustainable Tourism Council certified tour operators. The actual number that was achieved pre-COVID was 2,000. And then also get to this really knotty problem of how do you manage destinations where, like Venice or Barcelona or other places like the Galapagos, about how many visitors and vessels or Airbnbs or whatever is appropriate for a given destination, and protect the resources, but also deal with other things like infrastructure. And so the question you might ask is, why is WWF working with large companies? And this is not only in the travel industry, but also the tech sector and food commodity companies and timber companies and so forth. But if you look at the cruise industry, there are 365 vessels in the world. A lot of people don't appreciate that. There are 90,000 cargo vessels, just to put that into perspective. And those pre-COVID, those cruise vessels handled 26 million passengers. And then around the world, there are roughly 130 shore excursion tour operators that offer big and small various excursions. But when you look at the number of companies that handle 70% of the world's cruise travelers, it's Carnival and Royal Caribbean and all the subsidiary brands that they own. Similar in many respects to our partnership with Hilton. When you look at Hilton and Marriott, that comprises roughly 45% of all the beds. And so that's why we work with bigger companies and also the big financial institutions like the World Bank, where we're looking at different ways to underwrite some of these sustainable tourism initiatives and develop plans or master plans that have these various components on how do you address areas that already have a lot of impact and protect those and try to mitigate those impacts, but also brand new areas where they're contemplating tourism developments. And then another piece of the puzzle, and I could speak to this all too well from my experience, are travel planners. And those travel planners really becoming educated on destinations, not only those iconic destinations, but those who are what I call under tourism destinations, where one can develop itineraries and work with tour operators that are creating these travel experiences that really create the incentives for local communities to protect their resources and benefit the community as well. So that, and there's a great willingness on the part of travelers, as this recent Booking.com survey showed, that there's a hunger to travel in a more sustainable way. So I'm going to leave you with a video.
Suppose now shush, she makes the sound the sun she makes to calm me down.
So again, at the heart of all of this is partnerships. the challenges are so large that, and tourism actually touches many of the areas of focus at WWW work. Not only biodiversity, but climate, water, food, forests, and it really takes pulling together all elements of the travel industry throughout the supply chain to really create a brighter future for the industry. So I'm going to turn it over back to Hugh. And we do have some time for questions.
I was on mute. Yes, we do. Jim, thank you so much. Wow. It was pretty impressive. It's just incredible. I have a couple, I mean, I was blown away by your stat about the cruising industry. 70% of all cruises take place on 2 cruise lines, Royal Caribbean and Carnival. Can you tell me a little bit about, I know they're doing it, they're a big company, and are there consumers demanding this, that they become better stewards, and that's why they want to partner with you? Maybe you can tell us from the mindset of the business, why are they doing this?
The driving force, well, I should first say that what makes it really happen on a large scale is really a commitment upon the CEO and chairman of the organization. And they're for-profit business, but they also, in the case of Royal Caribbean, they recognize that the lifeblood of their industry is saving the oceans, because that is the quality of their guest experience. If there's a lot of plastic floating around the ocean where people are snorkeling, not a great experience. Likewise, things like food waste and reduction of greenhouse gases and fuel economy, it helps them improve their bottom line. And so when you look at the travel industry as a whole, one organization I might suggest is really leading at scale, and that is the World Travel and Tourism Council. And this is roughly 220 of the largest travel companies, and the members are the CEOs of those companies. And they have made ambitious commitments on illegal wildlife trafficking and have been following through. So a company that I will note is Trip.com, formerly known as C-Trip. They have 400 million users. They worked with our office in Southeast Asia to address this issue of illegal wildlife trafficking, because travelers in that part of the world are the largest purchasing channels for illegal wildlife ivory, for example, illegal ivory. And then one of the individual who is in charge of WTTC's sustainability committee is Intrepid Travel, Daryl Wade, the chairman and CEO. And I would encourage you to go to their website and download their annual report. It's an integrated financial and sustainability report. And I think you'll be blown away by how they have put into their business strategy, integrated this idea of purpose, profit with purpose. And I would encourage you to do that for Marriott, or MSC Cruise Lines is another one, or Hilton. Hilton is a really good example in my mind of a large hotel chain that has 6,000 properties approximately. And look at all the things that they're doing to elevate their game in terms of sustainability.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. We had Jeff Manchester of Intrepid talk about what you're referring to, and it's pretty impressive. I wanted to follow up on the cruise. Someone had a question. She's a little bit well, maybe not skeptical, but there's a lot of skepticism when big companies talk about sustainability, greenwashing, to quote Jamie Sweeting, is rampant in the travel industry. How does WWF protect against that?
Okay. Well, with respect to shore excursions, what we did was and if you go onto the Royal Caribbean site, we were able to work with them to endorse the Global Sustainable Tourism Council's destination stewardship, destination and tour operator certification programs. And what that did was that they, for shore excursions, they made a commitment, as I showed earlier, to source 1,000 shore excursions by tour operators that were certified. Well, this certification isn't just an exercise. What it is involved is that you hire auditors from certifying bodies who not only look at what you have on paper, but they go out in the field and they check those tours. It's kind of like the equivalent of the MSC, or Marine Stewardship Council, certifying fisheries, or FSC, forestry. And then they also created financial incentives for those tour operators to become certified. And they also gave them preferential marketing on their website if they were certified. So the same is true with destinations. They endorse the GSCC certification standard for destinations. Worked with us and our teams in the Mesoamerican Reef and also the German government to create assessments, destination assessments, and kind of a planning process that can implement these standards. And so in the previous 5 years, they supported us in the area of $5 million. This all on their website, this partnership, to really, I mean, for lack of a better term, put their money where their mouth is and work with an organization that could give based strategies that are not just statements that are plucked out of thin air. The same thing is true with science-based targets for climate. So that is one of the big things that WWF is advocating for, is that if you really want to get serious about minimizing your impact and reducing your greenhouse emissions, you first have to measure your current emissions, and then you have to set science-based targets. And so, so that's how we approach our partnerships, and again, really having it grounded in good science and not just these aspirational statements.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. This you may relate to, having worked in the industry. I have Pecky Gregor is asking, it's great you're working with these large companies. What about smaller companies like hers? Do you have any tools that they can use to help smaller companies in sustainable practices? With ideas like that.
Community-based tourism is, as I showed earlier in the Namibia video, is really another important component to the solution. Because again, if you give these communities financial incentives, then they're going to want to protect the area that they live in versus poaching or cutting down forests. Now, one I can think of is the Mahdi Valley next to Chitwan National Park, a project that I worked on. And it's a homestay program. And we created, along with the Australian government and Intrepid, a homestay program where there are initially 11 homestays, but it also, from a business standpoint, was really valuable for Intrepid because it is a place they bring roughly 1,000 travelers from pre-COVID from Kathmandu to Delhi, and roughly 2,000 travelers from Delhi to Kathmandu. And so they needed a place to stay around Chitwan National Park. They're committed to community-based tourism. And so we hatched this project that got up and running within a year. Intrepid provided the hospitality training because WWF, that's not WWF's wheelhouse. And most importantly, they created the market. The small communities didn't have to go out there and market and compete with everybody else in the world. So it's these kinds of partnerships that we also gravitate. I mean, Namibia is probably the best example of them all. Peru, if you look at Peru, I was blown away when I went down there to a community-based tourism conference that there are over 1,000 registered community-based tourism operations in the country. And so that is especially in and around protected areas. That is a key component to mitigating the threats of poaching, deforestation, and so forth in and around those protected areas. And that is also true in our national parks too, for that matter. I mean, if you look at the gateway communities, I would encourage you, this would be really interesting for you to do this, is to look at the National Park Service, our own National Park Service. Just Google visitor spending effects, and you'll get a website that looks at both the direct and indirect economic benefits of every single one of the national park units. And I think you will be blown away by how even the smallest protected, like the National Grasslands Reserve, or what the economic benefits are to those local communities. And that sort of model, I mean, in a way, well, in many ways, the whole idea of national parks was created in Yosemite right there in the middle of the Civil War in 1864, when Abraham Lincoln protected the Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of the Big Trees. Yellowstone came later in 1872 as the first national park. But really, this whole idea of protecting the resource for future generations and providing a quality visitor experience and providing economic benefit started in 1864 in Yosemite. So look at that website. It's very illuminating on how, even in the smallest parks, how the model, what that model is.
No, that's really cool. So it's a national, in the National Park Service, visitor spending effects. Is that correct?
Correct.
Awesome.
So, if you could share that link.
No, I'm gonna look it up.
It's a mind blower. And they do this survey about every 2 to 3 years.
Okay, I'll check it out. Christina, do we have time for one more question? I did just a quick one, a really quick one here, Jim. You've been in the industry. You've been in the shoes of a lot of our attendees, and you from experience, do you have any business lessons that you learned surviving a disruption? I mean, you've never experienced a pandemic, but you mentioned SARS, the Gulf War. What was your experience working with GX? Anything you can pass on? Any words of wisdom?
Right. I think the biggest one is scenario planning, because there will be disruption. I think if you look over time, between 2008 and 2018, there were 90 disruptions of varying sizes to the travel industry. Not necessarily global, but there are things like Ebola, There was a 2008 economic downturn. And one of the publications I might recommend is the World Travel and Tourism Council publication, and it's called Crisis Response and Recovery. And it has on one of the pages the average recovery times for each type of things like terrorists or public health events or natural disasters like tsunamis or volcanoes or whatever. And so that is very informative, that to assume something, and this is what I did, we assumed in our business plan that something is going to happen every 2 to 3 years, and that you shouldn't be surprised about that. I mean, obviously this pandemic was a big one, but many companies will survive and are marketing aggressive. Well, they were marketing throughout the storm, which is a great time to market, kind of counterintuitively, to get your brand out there and say, "Hey, we're still here," and then you come out stronger. And then another lesson is to build that war chest, knowing that this will come.
Okay, Jim. I've been told we're running into the next session, which I don't want to do that.
Okay.
But Jim, thank you so much for you being here. I mean, it's just fantastic, and I'm just honored that you participated in this. And then if anybody has any more questions for Jim, please send them our way and we'll send them to you. So thank you very much, Jim. Okay.
Okay. You're welcome. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.